Let me see which one is better. So did she release like every video, and I can compare the two and see which ones are better. Okay, let's see. No, these are only 2 bosses. Okay, it doesn't matter. All right, we'll try Taloc. The playlist is all bosses. Okay, well I can just start with this one.
Welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're looking at the first boss you'll be fighting next expansion, which is Taloc.
So being the first boss within Uldir, you're probably expecting Taloc to be an easy and an uninvolved encounter like we've seen with other first bosses.
Let me guess,
but this one is slightly different.
What?
This 3-phase encounter is all about maximizing space within the room before you become overrun with blood patches, whilst you dodge one-shot abilities. So let's jump straight into the encounter from the start, and we'll show you all the way through.
It's the same
So the
room.
most important ability to counter in this phase is the plasma discharge.
Okay.
On a timer, 3 players in the raid will get a debuff, and after 3 seconds they'll begin to deal ticking damage to anyone within their circle animation around them, whilst they begin to drop 4 blood patches. These patches deal large ticking damage to anyone who stood within them, and they never go away. Now, as the encounter room at this point
So
isn't all that big, and the patches are rather large, we found it important to have these patches as stacked as possible on the left-hand side of the room. Whilst testing, you could actually stack new patches on top of old ones, but it did require large spot healing, so it's probably not a good idea for live. Now, although these patches last forever, they can be cleared away every single time the boss reaches 100% energy. At this point, he'll begin to cast Cudgel of Gore at the current tank. After this long cast, he'll charge towards the tank and slam the ground, leaving his weapon behind. Not only does this clear nearby patches, but it also deals large drop-off damage to anyone within 30 yards, pretty much one-shotting anyone who's too close. So every time this ability was cast, we had our tank stand within the patches and move away as the boss charges. Meanwhile, the stacked raid moves slightly from the charge location to reduce, or if you're far enough, you can completely remove, the drop-off damage.
So basically what happens, just so everybody's on the same page, is that there are circles that you get, and you need to run out of the raid, and then the boss will charge onto the tank, and if the charge is on the circles, it despawns the circles. That's what happens.
After he's done this ability and walked back to the raid, at some point he will go and retrieve his weapon before he reaches 100% energy again.
Okay.
When he charges over to do this, this will deal damage to anyone in his path as well as knocking them back, before then just returning to the tank.
Okay.
The raid, mainly melee players, need to watch out for this charge because it does deal a large amount of damage and you can be knocked back into more blood pools, which might finish you off.
Okay.
The only other ability to keep an eye out for is Sanguine Static. The boss will cast this on a player and then send out lines of blood towards them, and if you're hit by these, you're knocked back. This hits pretty hard, but it's the knockback that is the biggest problem, as again, you could potentially land in blood and it could kill you off. This ability is, however, pretty easy to deal with. Like Wake of Flame on Agrimar, we had the fixated player move to the side of the raid so that the majority of the raid didn't even need to move. Sanguine Static can, however, target players with the Plasma Discharge.
So you just don't stand behind the red shit.
So whilst they're out dropping their blood patches everywhere, they could also be hit by the lines. There's not really much you can do about this, just spot heal those players just in case they're knocked back into patches they've just dropped. But that's it for this phase. After you've dealt with those abilities and got the boss to 60%, he'll move into the middle of the room and begin to take 99% less damage.
Oh shit.
He'll also spew blood across the middle of the room, so as he transitions, make sure you're not stood there. At this point, you'll then realise that you're actually on an elevator as you begin to slowly descend into the rest of the instance.
During this phase, you have 2 different types of ads to deal with. Volatile droplets will fixate on random players within your raid and explode whenever they come into contact with any player at all. By stacking in this phase, it causes all the ads just to funnel in a straight line towards the raid. This makes it incredibly easy for one of your tanks to simply soak them and remove them from the fight. The coalesced bloods, however, are the most important. These guys must be picked up by the tank, and while they're alive, they'll consistently spawn bloodstorms. These work similar to the plasma discharge patches.
So you just kill the
tank
ads.
must slowly move the ads around the platform, making sure that they maximize the area that the raid has to play in. Meanwhile, DPS need to nuke the ads down before it becomes too overwhelming and you run out of space.
So here's what's happening here. You've got the coalesced ads that you need to just like damage down as melee, right? And you're like rotating around. And then these ads run towards a random player, and then the tank stands in front of it and absorbs the explosion whenever this mob hits its closest target. So it's the exact same as the heroic Taloc ads that would spawn in Firelands.
Of course, being stacked so the volatile droplets can be effectively soaked away from the raid by another tank. Once the elevator has finally reached the bottom, the boss will become active again and knock everyone off the elevator. At the exact same time, any pools that are left in the elevator area will despawn, and also half the time kill off any ads that are left over. We're not sure exactly what Blizzard are going to do for this for live, if the ads are going to die to this stump or not, because on half our attempts they just didn't. But if you do transition with the ads, it's so important that you kill them first, because dealing with a boss in this last phase with all of his mechanics, as well as having to move all these ads around the room just to make sure that the puddles are in the right place, is definitely a bit chaotic.
Makes
so kill
sense.
off the ads first, and then you can swap to the boss to begin the phase. The fight now goes back to phase 1, but you have a much larger room to work in.
Okay.
We decided to place the plasma discharge patches behind the raid from this point onwards, and slowly rotated the boss around the outside of the room. As for the Cudgel of Gore charge on the tank, we pretty much ignored the patches unless they were easy to get to, and just made sure the boss was always more than 30 yards away from the raid. We spent a good 5 minutes in this last phase multiple times, and still was not even close to running out of room.
That's a long
fight. Now the
fight.
only difference in this final area is that the volatile drops will continue to spawn around the edges of the room. Again, we just had a single tank go out and soak them.
Green's gonna get them.
Anyone can.
Easy.
They're not really that lethal. But that's all it is for this last phase.
Okay.
It's almost identical to phase 1, except you have a much bigger room, and you have to soak a couple of little ads every now and then.
That's not hard at
but
all.
Let's leave some feedback. What do we think of this encounter?
So first bosses are very important. You've got to find a balance in making the fight relatively easy, so like new people can come in and still experience the raid, but you've also got to set a good tone for the rest of the instance, and we think they've actually done a particularly good job here. The majority of first bosses are primarily static and require you just to deal with basic mechanics, like think of Nithendra, Scorpion, or maybe to a lesser extent, Grassy Wellbreaker as well. But this boss having multiple phases and an elevator ride between two rooms, that's just so fantastic. It looks amazing. I'd say that the first room itself is like a perfect size, like our first pool.
Do you guys care about the feedback, or do you want to just go right to the, what do you call it? Right to the next boss? Okay, nobody cares about that? Yeah, okay. So here's basically the way that I see it, right? So he spawns at the beginning of the fight. We'll just look at what happens. So he spawns. You have to get these debuffs. You take him out of the raid. It's pretty simple. The guide was made before... Wait. Before huge mechanics were added.